Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe and today we have a very special one-on-one interview welcoming back to the channel Dharmesh Sheth, reporter at Sky Sports News. How are you doing, Dharmesh?
Joe, thanks for having me back. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I mean, it's ticking along, isn't it? United always in the news, of course, and we've got plenty of questions to ask you. We're going to look at Manchester United's transfers, ins, of course, very exciting, and a few outs as well that have gone on and seem to be going on. So let's just start, almost maybe with a glance towards the ownership. There seems to have been, last time we had you on the channel, I think it was 3 weeks or so ago now, and there hasn't been any update since then. It must be frustrating for you and very frustrating as United fans. It seems like everything's just stalled at the moment.
I think it's more frustrating for Manchester United fans because this has really, really dragged on now. I'm sure that United fans and possibly Erik ten Hag as well would have wanted all of this sorted one way or another just to get clarity well in advance of the summer transfer window opening. But as much as Erik ten Hag will say that he's got one plan, which is what he said post FA Cup final, he was asked the question, I think I mentioned this when I was last with you, that, will it be two different plans if there is a takeover or there isn't a takeover? And he just said, I have a plan. Yeah. And so he's saying all the right things about what's happening at Manchester United. But privately, you've got to suspect that he must be a bit frustrated about what's going on, because it's got to have an impact on the kind of player that United can target and the kind of money that they can put out in this transfer window. But having said that, there's the financial fair play in the background as well. So it's not a case of a new owner coming in and then suddenly United can spend $500 million straight away with no recourse. It's still got to be done in the proper way. And I think United have got that eye on financial fair play as well, which is why they seem to be dealing in that market, which looks like around, the 50, 60 million pound mark, unless they can get more departures and get sales and recoup some money that way.
Yeah, it's just like you said, it's so frustrating, and unfortunately no one seems to be able to provide an update on what is going on there. And I think presumably we'll hear in a week or whatever, however long, there'll be another flurry of information. Someone feels like they're in the lead, the Glazers fancy this person, and then it might well go cold again. But I think the point that you made there about this summer, we're almost at the point already where Ten Hag has to assume that there is no extra cash injection. There is even this sort of reported maybe 50 million that would be freed up by, not having to pay debt repayments. I think he has to go with the Glazers are the owners for this summer, doesn't he? So, from that perspective, I guess nothing does change. Let's move on to transfers then, because that is somewhere where there definitely is movement. Mason Mount done since we last spoke. The next big target seems to be Onana, that goalkeeper position, and we'll talk a bit more about De Gea in a few minutes. What is the current situation with that pursuit of Onana? Because it seems like last week we were getting towards almost this deal being done, and then there's been a few days of not a lot of news.
The information that I've got is that, positive talks are ongoing between Manchester United and Inter Milan over Andre Onana. I'm also told that there's a willingness from all parties, and in particular and possibly significantly from Onana, to get this deal over the line. But as it stands, Inter Milan, as we record this, are not budging on a 60 million euro asking price. Now, the simple fact that they remain in talks and that there's a willingness from all parties to do something, what it would require is possibly a compromise on that price, because Manchester United don't want to go that high. Not that high in an initial payment anyway. There are different ways you can get to a certain figure with add-ons, performance related, be they easy ones, be they more difficult ones. But I think it would require now a compromise between the two clubs for this deal to get over the line. But the fact that they're still talking, and they're still talking positively, that would kind of imply that, there is a deal to be done here. Onana definitely wants to come. Erik ten Hag is a big driver in this deal because he really, really wants to bring Onana to Old Trafford. Onana played under Erik ten Hag at Ajax, so he knows exactly what he can do. And look, two things I would say here. Some would say Inter can do what they want, and they're doing the right thing because they know now that Manchester United are in desperate need of a goalkeeper because of David de Gea's departure. But on the flip side, we also know that the primary target for Inter Milan for an incoming at the San Siro is Romelu Lukaku. And they, at the moment, are finding it difficult to come up with a package that is acceptable to Chelsea. I just wonder whether those two could be linked in some sort of way whereby Inter will compromise with Manchester United to get the Onana deal over the line, and then they can go full pelt and bring Lukaku back to Inter Milan because Lukaku wants to go back there. So possibly could be linked. And I think United are just keeping calm in that situation just now, as opposed to just saying, let's just pay what Inter Milan want. They have got their own valuation for Andre Onana, and they are encouraged by the fact that the player wants to come. Hence why they will deal in something below the 60 million euro that Inter are asking for.
Interesting as well there, isn't it? Like you said, the United are sort of playing it cool a little bit, which isn't something you really associate with United in the transfer market over the last decade. There does seem to be a little bit more of that, doesn't there? United doing these kind of, not sneaky tactics, I think that's maybe slightly unfair, but maybe slightly savvy, where we are allowing things to unfold a little bit rather than sort of forcing ourselves into an equation and ended up overpaying massively. I think maybe that's why, like you said, this Lukaku deal, United know that Inter want him. United know Inter don't have a lot of spare cash. That, you know, Onana's one of their sort of most sellable assets. I guess it makes sense. It's, again, the word frustrating is being used, but it's slightly frustrating as a United fan who wants to see us sign Onana, and I'd like to see him play tomorrow against Leeds, which obviously isn't going to happen now. But
look, I mean,
that's
Joe,
what we
United
want, but it makes sense.
Yeah, but Joe, look, United do have to be savvy in other ways as well, because this goes back to last summer. So last summer, I think United actually overspent, and the big reason for that was very early in that transfer window, they were getting huge encouragement that Frankie de Jong was going to join from Barcelona. And he was the number one target for Erik ten Hag. And they pursued the player, even though they knew that they wanted to bring in Antony earlier on in the window. Lisandro Martinez, of course, came early, as did Eriksen and Malacia. But the couple of the big ones were Antony and Frankie de Jong. But the Antony one kind of just like was left on the back burner because they were fully focused on trying to bring Frankie de Jong to the club. Yeah. When that didn't materialise and the season had already started, they'd only signed Malacia, Lisandro Martinez and Eriksen. And so they were in a position where we haven't got the squad here to compete so much. And then the first two games, I think, was probably the biggest blessing in disguise as far as United were concerned. Because if, for example, they had won both of those games, I'm not saying there would have been a different outcome with regard to transfers in, but would there have been a different complexion on Manchester United's transfer window? But because of the manner of those defeats, it was a home defeat in his first game. They were 4-0 down at Brentford at half-time. I think there was a sudden real urge, we need to sort this out. And because they needed to sort it out and it was so late, they spent, 60 to 70 on Casemiro and, close to 90 on Antony. And the Antony fee would have been so much cheaper had it happened at the start of the window. But you can't blame Ajax for raising the price simply because they wouldn't have been able to bring a replacement in. And they knew that United were desperate. And that's kind of filtered into the next two transfer windows, because the information we were getting, it was like there was no money in January, basically, unless like an absolute number one target up front became available. That didn't happen. And they knew in the summer those kind of players would become more readily available, but it didn't change the financial situation at United just there. So I think there's a lot of fallback from what happened last summer, but you could reflect back and say, look, they ended up doing the right thing because, United won a trophy in his first season, then they got Champions League for next season as well. But I think that's had a big say in the next two transfer windows since last summer. Yeah, it's a good point, that. And hopefully we've learned something from that. And by the sound of it, maybe we have. I think also you look at, you mentioned Antony there, and United overpaid, but you look at the cost that brought to Ajax. They sacked their manager, they had a very poor season, and part of that is because they sold so many players, and in the case of Antony, didn't really have time to replace them adequately. Yeah. So they needed that extra money to be able to rebound this season. So, it cost everyone quite a lot, that Antony deal in the end, didn't it? But yeah, hopefully we've learnt a bit from that in terms of Onana. I'll come to Hojlund in a minute, but while we're on goalkeepers, David de Gea is now gone. United need a number one for the first time in 12 years. Yeah. What is your understanding of how that unfolded? Because there seems to be some sort of mixed messages. A lot of, from my perspective, a little bit of disrespect from United towards De Gea, where there seemed to be this offer on the table that was then withdrawn. What's your understanding of that situation? I mean, just on the goalkeepers generally, I think the decision was kind of made in the end that United were moving on, not only because they were going for Onana, but there's also news that they're going for a second goalkeeper as well. They're exploring the Japan goalkeeper. He's only 20 years old, Zion Suzuki from Urawa Red Diamonds. So, I mean, there's no bid or anything there just yet as it stands, but the fact that they're going for two goalkeepers would imply that, that would have been the end for David de Gea. But the information I have with David de Gea, look, and I've seen all the reports about, it's quite, very good headline making, isn't it? When they say he was given the contract, he signed it, and then Manchester United, actually, no, we're withdrawing that contract. Here's another one. That's not the information that I have. Whether it happened or not, I'm not sure. The information that I do have is that they talked for months, United and David de Gea, about a new contract. You've got to remember that David de Gea had that 1 year option on his contract, but United decided not to exercise that option because they wanted to discuss a new contract. And by triggering the option, he would stay on those same wages. And we do know that United's policy is starting to go towards, we can't be giving out these big contracts anymore, simply because they found out when some signings don't work and they're on big money, there's nowhere to go because selling them becomes an issue. The player wanting to leave, why should I leave? I'm on a big contract. I don't need to leave. Yep. And then when some sort of loan deal materializes, United end up paying part of those wages as well. So it just was not sustainable for United to continue doing that. So you can understand why that option was not triggered for David de Gea, because they had to make a decision on the whole goalkeeping situation. What I was told about a month ago was his future was going to be in the balance, and that not only Manchester United were looking at their options, but David de Gea was looking at his options as well. And then once they finished those talks, it was decided by both parties that they would move in their own direction. So United would move in a different direction, and David de Gea would continue to explore his options outside of United. And look, he's a free agent now, so he's got no ties. There's no transfer fee or anything like that involved. He's only, early 30s. He can still have a really good career elsewhere. I mean, that's like 12 years at Manchester United. Not many goalkeepers last that long at some clubs, let alone a big club like Manchester United. And I think the other fallout from this, if United do get two goalkeepers, because right at the start of this window, even before, I was told that, Nottingham Forest were in talks with Manchester United over making a permanent move for Dean Henderson. It was, of course, on loan there last season. The fact that United might be going for two goalkeepers may result in United then re-sanctioning those talks with Nottingham Forest to allow Dean Henderson to leave. But it's all going to depend on whether they can get this Onana deal over the line. The noises are positive as far as we're aware so far, but until the deal is done and agreed, you can never say never with things like that on transfers.
Interesting that about De Gea there, how you're hearing it was slightly more even and slightly more of a mutual decision than what's been reported, although maybe De Gea had to let it be mutual after he was told that there might not be an offer there. But there was some reports as well that it was the club wanted to give him a contract and Ten Hag said, no, I'm putting my foot down, I want Onana, I want a new keeper. Do you know anything about that? Is that the case? Was it a club versus Ten Hag versus De Gea sort of triangle?
I've not got information on that. The only information that I do have with regard to Onana is that it is being driven by Ten Hag.
Okay.
Now, whether that was being driven by Ten Hag before the season finished and David de Gea's future was up in the air, that I don't know. But it's clear. You look at the history of the United signings in the season that Erik Ten Hag has been there. It's been quite, it's been driven quite a lot by Erik Ten Hag himself. Christian Eriksen trained with his Ajax team when he was recovering from his heart issue. You had Tyrell Malacia, who was playing for Feyenoord, and I think I heard quotes from Erik Ten Hag saying he's one of the best left backs I've ever seen, but he couldn't sign him for Ajax because of the rivalry between Ajax and Feyenoord. So when he goes to Manchester United, there's the opportunity to bring someone like that to the club. Lisandro Martinez played under him at Ajax. Then you've got Casemiro. I mean, Casemiro was a different case in point. He wanted Frankie de Jong. We all know that, but Casemiro, I mean, you can't argue with it. He's just an absolute world-class player. Yeah. And Anthony, of course, as well. going for players that he knows and that he trusts. So it's no surprise that Ten Hag is driving the deal to bring Onana to Old Trafford. Let's see if he can get it over the line now.
Yeah, hopefully he can. It sounds like there's not too far to go on that. And moving on to other transfers then, and interestingly that you framed it like that. But Hojlund, first of all, what's the latest on that deal? And secondly, he would be the first signing that hasn't either played under Ten Hag or is very well known by Ten Hag, or isn't an established world-class player like Casemiro. This would be the first real, almost like the scouting department's big signing since Ten Hag's arrived, wouldn't it?
This is an interesting one, Joe, because from the outset of this transfer window, and even in January as well, it was all about the number 9, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was like the main focus. And the noises we were getting were like, it's number 9, first of all, then it's a midfielder. Then we'll have a look at if there's any departures in the central defence, we might bring the central defender. And maybe we'll have a look at the goalkeeping situation if there's some money left over.
Yeah.
But look, David de Gea is there. But the goalkeeping situation, it kept fluctuating, on a daily basis on how high a priority that felt for United. And it's obviously a huge priority because of what's happened with David de Gea. And the number 9, who we thought was going to be the first recruit at United in the summer transfer window, maybe has gone down in the order of when it happens, but it's still high up there on the priority list. But it's changed from the start of the summer compared to now. We were talking about Harry Kane potentially coming to Manchester United. And then there was even talk, actually, United are going to bring in 2 strikers. They'll bring in someone who's experienced, like a Harry Kane, and then bring in a younger striker who can learn from Harry Kane. And all of the noises were that Hojlund was going to be that younger striker who could learn from Harry Kane. It's since emerged that it's going to be nigh on impossible trying to do a deal for Harry Kane, simply because 2 reasons. The price is going to go through £100 million. United aren't in that market at the moment. And also, Tottenham have got no intention of selling, full stop, let alone to a Premier League rival. So that one's completely gone to the back burner just now. And it appears now the Hojlund is the player to come in and assume that number 9 role. Now, that's big pressure for a player who's, had a breakthrough season at Atalanta last season, but 20 years old coming into the Premier League. It's going to be like a big ask for him if they can get that deal done. And look, it's not done yet by any stretch, because rather like the Onana deal, there is a gap in valuation between what Manchester United are prepared to pay and what Atalanta want for Hojlund. And if you look at it from Atalanta's point of view, like I mentioned before with Ajax and Antony, they know that Manchester United are desperate for a number 9. So they can just sit back and say, well, that's not going to be enough money. We're going to raise the price, not only because you're desperate for it, but because you're Manchester United and you're in the Premier League. We know how much money Premier League clubs have. I always speak to Gianluca Di Marzio from Sky in Italy, and he always jokes. He just says, oh, Sky Italy, we're coming with our begging bowl to the Premier League. You guys have all the money. So whenever a Premier League club comes calling, it's the Italian clubs, and to a certain extent the Spanish clubs as well, licking their lips because they know that they can charge a little bit more. It's a Premier League tax. Add that to what's now known as the Manchester United tax as well. But significantly, like Onana, Hojlund is giving encouraging signs that he does want to make that move to United. It's all going to come down to price and structure, though.
Okay, interesting. I mean, it does seem strange to me, and presumably United are slightly wary of this idea of the player who was meant to be the sort of the apprentice almost now being the main striker. And this is just my theory, is there a possibility that United could maybe, instead of spending big on a Kane and a bit less on Hojlund, is it possible that we could spend big on the younger player like Hojlund and maybe look at a slightly older player on loan or a short-term deal, not Weghorst style, but almost how we did with Cavani or something, where they come in?
It can't be ruled out.
Is that possible?
It can't be ruled out because United have got that history of doing that, haven't they?
Yeah.
Look, if you go back to even when Louis van Gaal was there, Radamel Falcao came in. You've got Edinson Cavani, as you mentioned there. Cristiano Ronaldo, to a certain extent. I know that's a completely different case, but Odion Ighalo came in.
Yeah.
Wout Weghorst, I know you're saying not the same, but he was a Eric Ten Hag signing as well. Yeah. And as much criticism as he got for not scoring, he was pretty much regular in a team that finished third and won a trophy at the end. Of course, he would have wanted more input with regard to goals. But look, Joe, that is something that I'm sure United might be having a look at. So if they could bring in an experienced striker at a lower cost or a loan even alongside someone like Hojlund, then that is a big possibility.
Just another theory that I've had that I want to sort of pose to you. We saw with Malacia, as you mentioned, Ten Hag being a big fan of him, that I can't remember who it was, but Feyenoord was it PSV? They'd basically agreed a fee, hadn't they, already, of around sort of 10 million euros or whatever, or 10 million pounds. And then United came in and went, "Oh, you happy with that? We'll give you an extra couple of million and you can give him to us." That was the reporting. This is me, Joe Smith, and I'm not suggesting that you're saying this by any means. Is there a possibility that United are keeping an eye on the Kane to Bayern Munich situation and going, we're going to have to chuck an extra 10 million on there because it's the English tax and all that, but do you think that that's possible? Or is it just me trying to keep my hopes alive of Harry Kane playing for United next season?
I mean, look, never say never, but everything from Tottenham's end would suggest that they're not going to sell, and they're not going to sell to a Premier League rival.
Okay.
It's almost like if he is to leave this summer, Sky Germany are reporting that if Harry Kane was to leave this summer, then the club that he would go to abroad is Bayern Munich. That's the noises that they're getting. But everything else would suggest no, not to a Premier League rival. And Tottenham would want to charge goodness knows how much if they ended up trying to sell to a Premier League rival. But then, if he doesn't sign a new contract and he doesn't go to Bayern Munich, then we all know what happens. He's 6 months away from being able to sign a pre-contract agreement with a Bayern Munich or any other club outside England. A further 6 months away from being able to go anywhere in the Premier League, in Europe, more importantly, the Premier League, for nothing at all. This is going to be such a big decision for Tottenham to make. And they do hold the cards, of course, because Harry Kane is under contract. He can say till he's blue, I want to leave, I don't want to play here anymore, which he hasn't done as far as we're aware just now. But Tottenham will make that final decision. The only difference between now and I think it was a couple of summers ago when Manchester City were close to signing him is that he's only got a year left this time. They had 3 years to play with that time. And it's a difficult situation. You've got to feel a little bit for Ange Postecoglou as well, because he's just come into the club. He probably wants clarity more than anyone. But if he's getting the same clarity that we're getting, Harry Kane will remain at Tottenham. But you're saying, things like, oh, they'll wait for a club to make a bid and then go in after. I think this happens generally in transfers. I've heard, when I've spoken to agents, they've said to me that a certain club just wants to be kept abreast of the developments of a certain signing. If there's any movement in the market, because we are interested in the player, we just can't do something just now, but we want to be kept abreast of what's going on. Now, say a bid comes in, then that club who is being asked to be kept updated will then have a decision to make. I think a good example was a couple of Januaries ago when Liverpool bought Luis Diaz from Porto, and the situation with that was that Luis Diaz, I think a deal was as good as done for that summer, so he was going to join Liverpool that summer. But then Tottenham came in January and put down an offer that Porto accepted, but out of courtesy, Porto, because they'd agreed something with Liverpool ahead of time, said, Tottenham have agreed this, we've agreed the deal, it's now up to you to come in if you want to. And that's when Liverpool acted, because they weren't going to bring him in until the summer.
Okay. So these things do happen, is what you're saying.
I would think they do.
It's me being slightly wishful thinking, but also not impossible. Let's maybe have a look at some outs as well then, because that seems to be another side of this story, that we need to sell players to buy players. Maguire, had a lot of mentions of, there was rumours of anywhere from Tottenham and Everton and Villa and West Ham and all these sorts of teams. Fulham, I think, were referenced as well. Then there's rumours that he doesn't want to go, or that United couldn't sell him anyway because of his wages. They'd have to give him money to leave. Then we saw, he's training 3 times a day and he wants to be back in the squad. What's going on with Harry Maguire?
This is going to be purely Harry Maguire's decision. Now, Erik ten Hag has been asked about Harry Maguire, and he said he loves Harry Maguire around the place. He's the captain of the football club. But he also said that Harry Maguire can't be happy with that current situation that he went through last season, because he was in a position where when everyone was fit, Lisandro Martinez and Rafael Varane were the first 2 choices. Now, when there was injuries, there came a point where there were even 2 other players who were going in ahead of Harry Maguire in those central defensive positions, in Victor Lindelof and Luke Shaw. Yeah. Now, Erik ten Hag was saying, look, Harry can't be happy with that position that he finds himself in, but he put the onus on Harry Maguire that it will be his decision. Now, the information we've got is that there will be talks, when he returns for pre-season, about the kind of, game time he will get and how he sees his own future and how Erik ten Hag sees his future. And I think the Harry Maguire situation will dictate to a certain extent whether there's any incomings in the central defensive positions, because you remember during the window, United were very, very interested in Kim Min-jae from Napoli. There was a release clause that was very achievable, under £50 million. And then Bayern Munich came in because at that time, United couldn't bring in somebody couldn't bring in a central defender because they were packed in that area, and there was no degree of certainty that there was going to be departures there, as there is now. So unless I think there's a departure in that area, then the central defence will stay the same. But of course, those talks with Harry Maguire and what Harry Maguire thinks, this is something that he'll have to be asked himself, is how he sees it, and whether he wants to, if it is going to be the case that he's going to have limited game time as he did last season, then what decision is he going to have to make? And by the same token, in midfield, I had some information that, United were looking at Fiorentina's Onana Amrabat, the Morocco midfielder, played really well in their run to the semi-finals in Qatar, possibly not so well against West Ham in the Europa Conference League final where West Ham won the trophy. But he's one of a number of players that Manchester United are looking at. However, the caveat there is, once more, you look at the number of midfielders that are at Manchester United just now, there would probably have to be departures and some recouping of money in sales before they dealt with any more arrivals, aside of the 3 that we've been talking about in Mount, Onana and Hojlund.
Interesting. Yeah, Fred, I think there's been rumours of Fulham quite consistently. There was also talk of potentially one of the Saudi teams as well. And McTominay, again, talk of Newcastle, but that's, they've bought Tonali now and everything seems to have gone quiet on that front. Do you see Fred and or McTominay going and maybe, obviously United wouldn't mind selling him, but do you think there's a good chance they'll leave?
Not too much noise about McTominay just now, but with Fred, there's definite interest from Fulham. But in initial talks between the clubs, I think there was a gap in valuation between what Manchester United wanted and what Fulham were prepared to pay. But I think Fred in his 30s now and a year left on his contract. And I think around about 20 to 25 million pounds was the asking price. And I don't think Fulham were prepared to pay that. It's one of those that they could revisit later on in the window, because the phrase I was given was, we're not interested at that price. Right. So there's room for negotiation if Manchester United are prepared to do that. And it all depends as well on Erik ten Hag and the recruitment team. If they find a midfielder that they think this is going to be a game changer, or this will be someone that we definitely need to bring in, then that could work in Fulham's favour with regard to price. Okay. It's clear at the moment. I mean, it doesn't look like Fred's going to be signing a new contract. So effectively, aside of January, which is always very, very difficult, this will be the last realistic time when they can get some sort of reasonable fee for Fred right now. So be interesting to see how that one goes.
Yeah, hopefully, something can be done there. And just before you go, obviously, you've mentioned there Onana, Mount obviously done already. Hojlund seems to be the one after Onana if we can get Onana's sword, which looks quite likely. Do you see any targets after them? You mentioned Amrabat, but is there anyone else that's sort of a bit of a surprise, or you said Zion Suzuki as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're looking for the 2 goalkeepers.
Yeah.
Because if you think about what the situation is with the goalkeepers just now, last season you had a situation where it was David de Gea, Jack Butland, and Tom Heaton. Now, Jack Butland's loan is over. He's now gone to Rangers. David de Gea has left the club. Dean Henderson is coming back. So as it stands, it's Dean Henderson and Tom Heaton. Now, Tom Heaton signed a new contract. Now, if United go in for 2 goalkeepers, then you'd probably expect Dean Henderson to leave, and that could be a way that United can increase their budget, because he's quite a saleable asset with regard to how much money they could command for him. You're talking in excess of 20, 25 million, 30 million pounds potentially, if Nottingham Forest get their man. That would mean, United would be recruiting 2 goalkeepers. Along the back line, like I said, central defence is an area that they are looking at, but probably only if there's a departure in that area, and central midfield as well. You've got Casemiro, Mount, and Bruno Fernandes, who you'd expect to be the first choices in that 3. But then, you've got McTominay, you've got Fred. I've probably forgotten a few others as well. Now, if they want to recruit and add to that, there would probably have to be a departure as well. But Amrabat is definitely one that they're looking at.
Interesting. Right. I think that's everything. Thank you very much going through all of that. There's loads. It's quite exciting. There's actually United actually going for quite a few players at the moment, aren't they? Yeah. So there's going to be some changes in there, definitely. Thank you, Dharmesh, for coming on, of course. And thank you at home for watching as well. Hit subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell as well, because that way, every time we go live, every time we bring you a new interview with people like Dharmesh, bringing up the latest, all the greatest news from Manchester United, you will see it first. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you in a bit.